May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be always acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our rock and our redeemer. Amen. Please be seated. So, this Friday would have been my father's 74th birthday. And as I was going through things this past week and looking to that, it kind of made me a little sad that he wasn't here to see where I'm at and what has happened since he died. And I decided I just needed to kind of get away from the stress of the world and everything and just kind of do something for myself. So I went to the beach because that's the easy thing to do when you're here. And went over to Rehoboth and had a nice afternoon and evening at Rehoboth, just relaxing on the beach, enjoying the water and the jellyfish, which are fine, you know. They didn't really damper anything too much, but enjoying that and just being away. And today is the 13th anniversary of his death. He died 2 days after his birthday. So today is also a particularly difficult day for me. It's that stressful day. And as I was reflecting on this, and I realized that we have a little bit of that sense in the gospel lesson today, although we don't realize it because the lectionary does not give us the backstory. We kind of start with this Jesus withdrawing. There's a reason he withdrew. We're not given that in this story, but there's a reason he withdrew. Right before this story that we were presented with today, there was a large banquet in King Herod's palace with a massive feast of every kind of imaginable food, and the centerpiece of that feast was the execution of John the Baptist. And that's what predates our story. Jesus and the disciples have just learned that John the Baptist has been beheaded and executed. And I imagine they're a little stressed. They realize that they could potentially be next. The world is a dangerous place for them in their ministry. And they need to take a moment to withdraw. So Jesus gathers them together and they go off into the wilderness. And that's where we pick up with the story today, this feeding of the 5,000 or the 5 loaves and 2 fishes. However you know this story, it doesn't really matter. It's the same story, this powerful story of a miracle. And that's where we're picking up today, with Jesus withdrawing from that banquet and all of the news of the death of his cousin and beloved forebearer. He withdraws to the wilderness. He takes a moment spiritually to center himself, to look towards safety, to commune with God and creation, and be nurtured. But it's in this that the crowds in need hear about him withdrawing and beat him there to the wilderness. These large crowds go to the wilderness because they are in need themselves. They're not there to hear his message or anything like that, although I'm sure they would love to. They're there because they need healing. They're sick. They're in need. And when Jesus, even in the midst of trying to get away from it all just for a moment, sees these crowds, something happens. He has compassion on them. And this is not compassion. This is compassion. It's not a compassion of the heart. It's this feeling deep in your guts, compassion. Splugnutsomai is the Greek word for that. It sounds really nasty, but it's this compassion being moved in your gut. He feels their pain and need and has compassion on them. He moves. And in this, we have this miracle that happens because of that compassion. He sees their need and responds, even though he and the disciples are probably not in the best place. He tells the disciples that even though they're in the wilderness and there's nothing around to send the crowds, the disciples want to send the crowds away, but he tells the disciples something different. He says, you give them something to eat. You give them something to eat. So the disciples, clearly overwhelmed with this idea, gather up what they have, and they don't have much. We already know that. But there's something going on here. You give them something to eat. We know at the end of this lesson that this is a crowd of 5,000, at least. It's interesting here that the 5,000 doesn't count women and children, which means it's a significantly larger crowd than 5,000. If you look around here in this room right now, we probably have around 150 or so, give or take. And I'm counting everybody. So this is a massive crowd, and the disciples have 5 loaves and 2 fishes. It's not going to be enough. There is no way that this is going to be enough. But something happens. Even in their doubt, they still do what Christ has called them to do. They grab those and bring them to him and begin feeding the crowd. I'm sure they have this moment of wrestling with God right there, like Jacob, where they're like, this isn't enough food. This isn't going to work. We need to send them away so they can get food before it gets too late. They're having this moment of wrestling with their own doubts and fears. And Jesus is there saying, I'm here. I am with you. Trust in me. Even when we, like me, in my own darkness of a rough time, understand that through my inadequacies, God is still there with me, guiding me and helping me when I need it. I can wrestle with things, but God and Jesus are with me in those moments. And in the miracle that happens, there's enough food for the entire crowd, with tons of food left over, baskets full of food left over. But I want us to notice something here, and I think this is an important thing to notice. Jesus gave it to the disciples to do. They fed the crowd. Jesus empowered them to do the work of compassion, even in their own darkness, to reach out and help those in need, to heal those who needed healing, to nurture those who needed nurturing, to be with those in their darkness. And I think that's the lesson we can really take away from this, is that we in our faith can be inspired to do compassion, to not just feel it in our heart, but to feel it in our guts and want to go out and help, to really help, to be Christ in someone's need, to feed them when they need the food, to nurture them. It also is reminiscent of another story. As this crowd wandered into the wilderness to meet Christ without food, they were nurtured by Jesus and the disciples, who gave them food in the wilderness. Much like the Israelites, as they left Egypt, wandered through the wilderness, were given manna from heaven to nurture them on their journey. And I think that's another piece of good news in this. Even when we feel like we're in the wilderness, when we're not the ones who are helping others, but the ones who need help ourselves, God will provide for us. We are not alone in that. We are nurtured because of God. And I want us to look really deeply at this nurturing miracle that happens here. Did you notice the verbs when the disciples begin to start this miracle with Jesus? What were some of the verbs? Quiz time. This is where you can answer me. I give you permission. Yell it out. What are some of those verbs? I've cheated. They're highlighted in mine so I can see them easier. So, bring them to me. Then he blessed, broke, and gave, and then they all ate and were filled. Blessed, broke, gave, ate. Blessed, broke, gave, ate. It's a Eucharistic text. This is a feast to counter the feast of death with Herod, the feast where John the Baptist was executed. This is a feast of life. It is a feast that truly nurtures us like the Eucharist. Jesus is pointing to something that will happen later on with the crowd, that they all will be nourished. And this is what Paul's talking about in the letter to the Romans. This is the promise of Christ. Israel was promised so many things in their covenant, in the patriarchs, and everything. And all of those promises were held. God kept all of those promises. But from that comes a promise to all of us. The promise is no longer just to the children of Israel, but to every single one of us, to all of you, to me. The promise of Christ freeing us and nurturing us and calling us beloved children of God. You are beloved children of God because of Christ. And that is the nourishment that we get. So as we go forth into this week, I want us to remember not the banquet of death, but the banquet of nourishing life. To remember that we are nourished by Jesus, who is present with us in the Eucharist and calls us, even when we're afraid, unsure, scared, don't know what to do, like the disciples, to go out and still do the work of the kingdom. To have love, to have compassion, to feel it in their guts and want to help them so much, to give of ourselves. And to remember that we're not alone in any of that. God is with us through all of that. And it is in that going out and helping that we, like Jacob, wrestle, but are most importantly blessed in the process. When we see those in need have their needs met, when we see them no longer fear, when we help them or just journey along beside them, that's when we are blessed. So think about that as we continue into this week and as we partake today in the Eucharist, how we are blessed even in that and sent forth to do the work God has called each of us to do with the gifts God has given each of us and the interests God has given each of us. So go forth. Do the work you're called to do. Love and have compassion. Be Christ to those in need. Amen.